So today I'm going to have a chat with you guys about obviously psychological safety and just better understanding your own mental health in the workplace and getting to know a little bit of what might be contributing to the mental health of your employees, because we know that mental health really is the backbone of the workplace. It impacts so much of the workplace, not just obviously our mental health, but our physical health, but also our job performance. So we actually do need to understand quite a lot of what contributes to our mental health, and as leaders, you need to understand your own mental health, your own stresses, how you manage that, and how to look out for your employees as well. And so we're going to talk a bit about psychological safety today. And so I'll go into a little bit more of that in a moment, but it's worth noting that it is something that we almost see as being an essential part of the business. And Des and Ben spoke a bit about different areas of the business, and all of these factors really contribute to that psychological safety. So it is something we need to really keep in mind when running a business. But at the very tip of that is understanding your own mental health, because as leaders, you really set the tone for what does your environment look like, how does it impact your mental health, and how does it impact the mental health of the staff. So I thought I'd also touch a little bit on what are some of the outcomes of poor mental health in staff. And obviously the big one is absenteeism, right? If staff aren't feeling well mentally or physically, they're going to be calling in sick. And this absenteeism really impacts businesses in a few different ways. So for Australian workplaces, there's a loss of around 33 billion per year just due to absenteeism. So financially, people calling sick is really impacting businesses. Up to 40% of productivity is reduced from these unplanned absenteeism, because obviously employees aren't able to do the job if they're calling in sick. And then we see a lot of overtime as well. So up to 50% of overtime is actually used to cover for the absenteeism. So we know that people calling in sick has a really big impact on the business. And people who do experience mental health concerns are at a greater risk of calling in sick, right? So they're going to experience not just concerns in the workplace, but if they have their own mental health concerns outside the workplace, that's going to impact their ability and desire to actually come in the first place. So what is psychological safety? When we think of this, we are really just thinking about that shared belief that staff have, that they feel safe to almost express their own psychological needs, beliefs, attitudes, and everything like that. So we look at a few different things that impact. Really here we're talking about that interpersonal risk, right? So can staff feel as though they're able to interpersonally engage with not just each other, but also managerial people, and express their concerns, express new ideas without that fear of adverse effects, right? So we're looking at that ability and belief that we can speak up freely and share ideas, admitting mistakes, right? So we want to create that culture where people can admit their mistakes and almost turn that into that learning experience so that they're not afraid to admit when they've done something wrong. Looking at how we can promote people's help-seeking behaviours, so can they actually ask you for help if they're struggling? But then also we're looking at that idea of challenging the status quo, right? I think Des sort of commented about back in the old days, whereas, have a spoon of cement and harden up, right? So we're looking at trying to find those ways to make sure that staff actually feel as though they're safe to express concerns, share ideas, and contribute to the workplace. And so why does it matter for business? We've obviously covered some of the business side of things in terms of the impact of absenteeism. But we know when we have a psychologically safe environment, it really impacts things like innovation, creativity, and problem solving. So staff are actually more willing and able to engage in critical thinking and express new ideas and collaborate with their team members, because they have that safety that if they present an idea, it's not going to get shut down. So we do see that greater collaboration, as well as productivity, because they're more motivated to do the work, more motivated to engage in these new ideas and try new things. From the social side of things, we see improvements in loyalty and morale, right? So you might notice a shift in the mood and the relationships between staff members because they actually just feel safe to express their ideas and express their beliefs. But then we see the outcomes of this being impacting turnover and absenteeism. So when people feel psychologically and mentally safe at work, they're less likely to call in sick and they can actually express some of these beliefs or concerns. But as sort of Des and Ben have described today, it really does start with the leaders, because we know that when leaders are feeling overwhelmed or stressed or emotionally dysregulated, the staff are really going to notice that, and it really impacts how they are going to approach you. They're not going to feel as though they can talk to you if they know that you're extremely stressed and reactive or something else is going on for you. So it really does start with the leaders at the top. And part of that is knowing, what does burnout and stress look like for you? Right? Being a business owner is incredibly stressful, as I'm sure you all know. And so we actually need to know, what does it look like for you when you're burnt out, when you're stressed, and knowing how you can actually manage that so that we see those flow-on effects for the team. So you really are the start of that intervention. So before we get into stress, who here thinks they're good at identifying their own levels of stress? A few hands, yeah? Yeah, and I always ask this question when I have clients who come in with stress being the one issue, or the main issue. I'll say, what does stress look like for you, and what are the stresses? And sometimes when our bodies go through extreme dysregulation, we actually don't really know what's causing it. So finding that stressor is actually really tricky for a lot of people. So I like to break things down in terms of what are the different types of stress we might experience, particularly at work. So the first type we might have is acute stress. So this is really that stressor that's almost just short term and provides or requires that immediate action. So it could be things like public speaking, or being told you're presenting today and you need to come up with a presentation, right? So it's a short-term bout of stress that requires sort of that immediate response. We can then have episodic acute stress, and this is almost when we have acute stresses, but they're quite frequent. So this could be regular back-to-back meetings. Again, it sort of requires that immediate action, but it's happening quite frequently. But then we can have chronic stress, and this is often the really challenging one to deal with because it's that ongoing stress where something potentially, either the workload or the environment, isn't really going away. And so it's always there, and we have to sort of manage that on a regular and ongoing basis. So this could be that an unmanageable workload that goes on for months or months, or even the workplace environment, right? So having those conflicts between staff or between managers just creates an environment that feels constantly stressful. So there's actually there's no end point to that stress. So we need to think about what type of stress we're actually experiencing. But stress isn't all that bad, right? We actually need a little bit of stress to actually motivate our brains and our bodies into action. So if we look here on the left, so on the green side, if we have no stress at all, our brains aren't actually producing any cortisol, and we just don't have that motivation. Right, so when we wake up in the mornings, our brains actually release the stress hormone to get us out of bed. So hitting your alarm clock and snoozing isn't great because you're sort of just releasing all that cortisol over and over. But we do need a little bit of stress to get into that optimum zone, which we call eustress. And this is where we actually do see a really positive impact on our performance. So if we have a deadline that's clear, we know what we're doing, and we know how to reach the end point of that stress, it's actually quite motivating. So this is the sweet spot that we want to try and find. Obviously, if we go on the other side into too much stress, we are going to start to see some of those negative impacts and that distress. So we start to see the shift in the brain chemicals. Our body's producing too much of that stress hormone because it's just ongoing and chronic. And we start to see impacts on our emotions, so the anxiety and the panic's going to set in. But then we can also start to see the physical signs of that stress, so the burnout, the fatigue, the headaches. So we do want to keep in mind, how much stress do we have present in the workplace? Is it positive stress? Is it negative stress? And what's that sweet spot? All right, so one of the first steps I always try to explore is identifying those workplace stresses. And Des sort of touched on a few of these before. So these are just a couple of common ones, and you might have your own depending on what sort of business you're in. But things like the workload in conjunction with the deadlines, right? So a heavy workload by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, because again, it can promote that positive level of stress that motivates you. But if we are balancing that with unrealistic deadlines, that's obviously going to increase someone's stress and burnout because they think they don't have the capacity or the time to actually manage that workload. Lack of clarity in roles, I think Des touched on this one as well. As humans, we like a bit of certainty. We like to know what we're doing. And so when we do feel uncertain in our job or in our role, that just creates anxiety and stress. So sometimes if there's, if you've got staff who don't know what they're doing and you perceive that they're being really stressed out, sitting down and actually clarifying what their role is, what their job is, can help to alleviate a lot of that stress. Communication is a big one that's come up today. So this could be communication between colleagues, but also communication with management. So figuring out if there is communication breakdowns, ironing that out, making it clearer, changing the format. If some people prefer written communication, then explore that over verbal communication. That will help clarify things. Job insecurity and organisational change. Again, try and find that way to promote that sense of stability or certainty, but then also limited opportunities for advancement. Right, so if staff feel as though they're not really going anywhere or they don't have any clear direction, this can be quite stressful as well. Or if they feel as though their job isn't very stable, it can be quite stressful. So keeping these things in mind. And the effects of stress, again, thinking about this for yourself, right? What do you experience when you're going through periods of stress? We can have those physical signs, so the headache and the muscle tension. We might see the emotional impacts, so some of that mood irritability, anxiety because you're too stressed out and don't know how to manage the stress. The big one, I guess, for leaders that we want to try and get on top of is the cognitive impact of stress, right? When we're really stressed, it impacts our ability to make clear decisions or think clearly. So trying to find ways to help with concentration or forgetfulness, if that's a symptom for you of stress, is going to be a really big one. And then we can have those behavioural signs of stress as well. So absenteeism, reduced productivity, and even withdrawing from the team. So you might notice some people who are really stressed out stop coming to those team meetings or stop engaging with other members of the team. So with stress out of the way, thinking about how we can build a psychological safe workplace. But again, we are really wanting to start at the top. So for you guys as leaders, a big part of that's going to be checking in with yourself to figure out what does stress look like for you? What does burnout look like for you? And are you actually managing that? It's given if you've got a business that you're trying to run, you've probably got that mindset of I just actually need to push through and once I get over this stressor, I'll be sweet. But obviously running a business, there's going to be constant things popping up. So figuring out what does it look like for you to actually identify those signs of stress and burnout, but then what are you actually doing to manage that within yourself? So this could be prioritizing some of that reflection to identify those key stresses, exploring therapeutic support, if it's available to you, EAP programs, which I will talk about as well, but then also business coaching, right? Anything to help you get a bit of a grasp on what's actually impacting your mental health and what are some ways that you can try and deal with that. Modeling healthy work habits. So this is sort of showing your team that it's okay to, take breaks, stop work when you need to stop work and, logging off, right? So having that home life, work-life balance is a really important one to manage and model because you're going to be showing to your team that it's actually okay to separate home from work. And so if they are dealing with a lot of mental health concerns at work or at home, we want to try and figure out how we can sort of separate those two areas to reduce some of that impact. And it's setting that cultural standard. So we want the team to recognise what they can and can't do and what's appropriate and recognising those boundaries and setting those in place. Conversations. So this is sort of going back to communication, and that's obviously a really big one. So we're almost trying to, we want to set up that space where staff can feel as though they can actually express concerns or express ideas without being shut down or turned away. And so part of that is just asking the staff, what's going on for them, or is there something that you can do as leaders to help clarify their role? Is their deadlines not clear enough? Things like that, just simply asking your staff, are there any problems or are there any barriers that's making them feel stressed or contributing to their mental ill health? Leading with vulnerability and honesty. So this is going to promote that culture that it's actually okay for staff members to admit when they've made mistakes. And so they're going to be more willing to be open about struggles that they're having. If there are barriers in the workplace, they'll feel as though they can actually express that to you and feel as though they can make a mistake without experiencing any negative side effects. Being proactive about workload and expectations. So this goes back to, as humans, we like to have a bit of certainty around things. And so being able to sit down with staff members and recognizing what is a reasonable workload, what are the expectations? Do our staff members even understand or see where we're coming from in terms of our expectations? Making sure that that's all clear for them and clearing up any uncertainty or identifying any barriers that might impact these expectations of work performance. And then exploring support available. Making these sort of networking groups are great because if there are external supports that you think, look, this is outside of my scope, are there other supports I can reach out to get a bit of help? Again, it's going to be helping you manage your business and helping your mental health and your stress load, but then also exploring what supports can we put in place for the staff members as well. So this brings me to talk a little bit about EAP programs. So the employee assistance programs are essentially confidential counselling or psychological support for team members and staff members. Now, I guess the key thing here about EAPs is that it's really short-term and solution-focused, right? So when we have clients come to us on an EAP program, we really focus on building some of these stress management skills and working on that short-term issue that whatever they're coming to us with, we can try and help them as quickly as possible so that they can get back into the workplace and manage whatever's going on for them. So we really focus on those practical skills. We could explore things like stress management, anxiety, goal setting, communication, and resilience. So if they are experiencing ongoing stress and they're not sure how to manage that, we can sort of walk them through different techniques and explore what that looks like for them. Now, typically we sort of do 3 to 5 sessions, sometimes 7 sessions. It's up to the employer. After the 3 sessions, for example, we would often explore with them what does it look like for them to do and receive ongoing support. So we might do a few sessions on skill building and helping them manage stress, anxiety, whatever their case may be. If there are deeper issues, and often there are, we might discuss things like a mental health care plan and explore with them what does that look like to go to the GP, get a mental health care plan and receive that ongoing support. So EAPs, they're not a long-term thing for clients. It's really that short-term solution-focused therapy. And then we explore the longer-term therapy through, say, mental health care plans. But I guess the key thing about EAPs is it promotes that early intervention. And one of the things we often try to do, even in the business, is really just reduce that stigma around mental health, right? Everybody has some issues in their own life that they're dealing with. Everyone experiences anxiety. It's literally a key emotion that we all experience. The thing is, some people have better ways of coping with that anxiety. And that's really what we focus on with the EAP is trying to normalize that we all have mental health concerns at some point, and it does impact our work performance. So what are some of the skills we can put in place to make sure it's not having a really detrimental impact on the workplace? And the research supports the EAP programs. So there's studies coming out now looking at the benefits of EAPs. For example, that they can significantly not just improve the individual mental health, but also these effects are greater when there's that psychological safety, right? So when there is that freedom to talk about ideas and talk about mental health, this is where that EAP support is greater. So it's sort of that combined effect is always really good, but even the impact on business is quite good. So there's some research there from Beyond Blue and PwC, $3 to $10 return for every $1 invested to EAPs. And an average 2.3 return of investment. But the interesting thing here is that with the reductions and the benefits we see, there's across the 3 different areas. So employees who do access EAP supports or businesses who use EAP programs, we see that really good improvement in things like absenteeism. So the staff are going to be calling in sick less. Presenteeism, so this is when staff still attend work even though they are mentally unwell or physically unwell. We see a reduction in that, but then also a reduction in compensation claims. So whether that is for physical or mental health claims, the EAP programs can really help reduce the impact of this on business. So for example, at our clinic at Evolve, what we do is we work with the business to figure out how many staff might access the EAP. There's no sign up or ongoing admin fees. It's sort of a pay-as-you-go service. And typically we do 3 to 5 sessions. There is 7 there available. And again, we focus on that short-term therapy to really just build those skills for the staff. And then we explore what does that look like for ongoing support moving forward. So we might do the EAP sessions, explore the GP mental health care plan, and then try and get that ongoing support for the clients.